Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Terry Henney, WSGW farm broadcaster. Along with me is Scott Bales. And Scott and I are talking beans on this beautiful day out there with temperatures, 70 degrees, Scott? Is that what we're looking at again today?
It's hard to believe it, but it certainly looks that way.
Yeah, and it's been, we broke a record yesterday as far as warm goes. That was a record set back in 1945. So we broke that by a degree or two. So the weather conditions are taking off, very conducive for agriculture. And also, I think it's quite appropriate that we talk about agriculture and agriculture, especially here in Michigan, because this is National Ag Week. We're talking the week of March the 22nd when we're doing this program. And I know that on the 22nd, you were heading up into Michigan's thumb to pick up some bean seed, and you noticed a little activity out in the fields.
Yeah, that's for sure. I took a ride up kind of the western side of Huron County Monday morning, chasing after some seed because, like our growers out there, we're starting the research season early this year as well. With these warm, dry conditions, we've gotten quite a bit of tillage done, not only at the research farm, but it looks like around the countryside.
Yeah, it sure does. And soil temperatures, obviously we need some rain. We did get a little bit of a sprinkle, but we're running, a good inch and a half below average so far here for the month of March. And for the calendar year, we're running quite a bit behind. But soil temperatures are gradually working their way up, and before too long, we are going to have the opportunity to put some beans in. I understand there's plenty of sugar beets that have been going in just in the last few days.
Yeah, I talked to quite a few growers at some meetings we had last week, and it seemed like they were definitely getting the itch to put some beets in, and it definitely looked like that happened with this rain, holding off, giving us a few good days, Monday, Tuesday, and even most of the day yesterday.
Michigan is quite diverse when it comes to agriculture. I think only California is more diverse with crops than we are here in Michigan. And they don't grow very many navy beans or dry beans out in that part of the country, do they?
That's correct. They have some minor acreage of some more what I would call niche classes. But when we talk beans, Michigan is definitely in the top of that conversation.
Now, when we mention about the top, we used to be the navy bean capital of the world, and in particular up in Michigan's upper thumb with the bay and Lake Huron surrounding the thumb area, that peninsula, that little peninsula. That was ideal growing conditions for dry beans. Not so much the case anymore in terms of raising a lot of dry beans. Other parts of the country have kind of overtaken us. But because of the research that we're doing, and you in particular now, we seem to be working our way back up into higher status than what we were, let's say, 20, 25 years ago.
I would definitely agree with that, Terry. We talk about these environmental conditions that, we do have in Michigan and, in particular Huron County. And we talk about some of that, premium Michigan dry bean growing regions. And those conditions still exist, and over the past years, we've seen our acreage, go up and down at some times. A lot of times, we're looking at some competing crops and some other things for our growers. But I would still argue on an acre per acre basis, if we compare our Michigan growing region to some of these other regions, maybe the North Dakota, Minnesota region, we're still producing the highest yielding, highest quality dry beans in North America on that acre per acre scale.
As far as weather conditions go, what is ideal as far as raising beans?
Yeah, so beans are what I would say is pretty flexible as far as, if we talk about just rainfall. We've seen over the past few years that, we've been dry in the earlier part of the season, post planting up till flowering. And that's actually worked pretty well for us. It's kept some of our foliar growth down, helped us avoid some disease. But once we start that flowering period, and particularly into pod set and pod fill, we've begun to get those rains. And those August rains that we're getting or have gotten in past years, a lot of our old timers will call them bean rains. And I think that's a very fitting name for them, because they've definitely made some beans for us here, and keeping those moderated temperatures that our lakes produce for us, keeping that frost off in the fall and letting those beans fill out, in combination with those good bean rains, has produced some great conditions for us.
I know nighttime temperatures have always been a key as far as dry beans go.
Yeah, that's definitely an important factor when we look at those the pod fill on our Michigan beans, and that's where our lakes really work for us too, to help moderate those, and protect us from some of those temperature changes that we can see on the other side of the lakes when we look to our west and some of our competitors.
Now, as far as Michigan is concerned, we're talking about Michigan's upper thumb, but all around Saginaw Bay, we've got some pretty good dry bean growing areas there, don't we?
That's for sure. Even when we stretch into some of these regions that we might say are more non-traditional, as we go a little farther north, then maybe over into Midland County even, we still are producing some of that lake effect that really helps those conditions and helps our growers be successful, not only in Huron County, but around the Saginaw Valley and even extended out from there.
Now, we mentioned, and you mentioned, a very critical issue when it comes to raising any kind of crop, and that's disease issues. Have we been able to handle those a little bit better now than what we used to be able to?
I would say so. That is one thing that our Michigan climate can bring on, a little more severe, in my opinion, is when we talk about some of these diseases. We have a relatively high humidity point compared to Western production, which can cause us some increased challenges when we talk about, bacterial diseases, as well as some of our other fungal diseases, white mold included. I would argue that some of the most severe white mold in dry beans probably takes place in Michigan, due to those cool temperatures that we can get and high humidity, in combination with adequate rainfall. So those have been challenges that the research has definitely addressed over the past 100 years here in Michigan, especially when we talk about white mold. Progress has been limited at times, but we've definitely made some advancements when we look at both our genetics, how well these plants are able to avoid that infection and remain upright in the field, as well as some of our chemical products that we do have for making those protective fungicide applications. We've learned a lot about the chemistry, as well as what timing we should be putting these things on, what adjuvants we should be using in those applications, and correlating those with our weather conditions to get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, when we do make those fungicide applications.
I'm just kind of curious when it comes to planting the beans. Obviously, a lot of folks like to get crops in as early as they possibly can. In the case of dry beans, in the past, we used to have to throttle ourselves a little bit. Don't get in a rush. You could get everything else done, but we'll just hold back a little bit on planting dry beans. Is that still the case?
I would agree with that still, Terry. There's been a lot of conversations about, as they call it, ultra early soybean planting. When soil conditions are good, maybe, in a few weeks here, some guys putting soybeans in. But with dry beans, I would still say that, we're in that situation where I like a good June 1 or after planting date, warm soil temperatures. To me, the optimal recipe for success is the least amount of days that bean seed is in the ground before it's emerged. Last year, we had really warm soil temperatures, and some of these beans were, emerged 3 days after planting. And I think that's a recipe for success when we talk about dry beans.
So overall, let's use last year as an example, because it was a pretty good year for a lot of crops. How did the beans fare overall, the different varieties? How did they do?
Yeah, so I would rank last year's, bean season when we talk about yields is, average to above average. When we look at our plot yields, we had most of our yields were in the mid to high 30s, which are 100 weights per acre. It is important to think that those are, perfect stands of dry beans and optimal dirt. We don't have wet holes and those sort of things that we're dealing with. But it really does show us what yield potential was there and how good some of our conditions were when we got some of those later season rains that really produced those beans and pods.
Do we have any beans that aren't upright anymore?
We do have some production still. Most of that would be our kidney and cranberry bean production. I kind of lump those into one category that we do grow some in the Saginaw Valley. Most of it would be what I consider west of 127 on some of the irrigated sands. Often in times kind of in our potato production regions. They do well over there. It helps them avoid some of the root rots, and ability to irrigate with those determinate beans is a big advantage in producing that pod set and pod fill. Is they're not quite as flexible as our black and navy beans are. So that production still does exist and is a very important piece of Michigan agriculture. But definitely in the Saginaw Valley, we are focused on our blacks, navies, and small reds, which would all be upright.
Any change as far as the crop rotation goes, the crop that's in the field the year before, and then you put the dry beans in over the years?
Yeah, I would say everybody's system is a little bit different. We've looked into, rotations and length of rotations quite a bit, in combination with Marty Chilvers and, understanding how that rotation does affect our bean crop. We have learned that longer is definitely better for dry beans if we compare, say, a 2-year versus a 3-year versus a 4-year rotation. Most of the time, we recommend at least a 3-year rotation in dry beans. What those other crops are isn't as much of a concern as just having that time between bean crops. And it definitely helps, especially when we talk about some of our root rots and fusarium in particular, and rhizoc, which have been bigger points of discussion over the past few years.
We have quite a bit of clay soil around, and I know in some of the major dry bean areas, the soil has always been a little more loamy. But I don't know, does that bean yield as well in the lighter soil or in the little bit heavier clay?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think a big key to me is always, avoiding that wet feet, so to speak, with dry beans. Being able to get that drainage and avoid those root rots in that really heavy soil, which with the better tile drainage that we've been seeing go in across most of the region, I think it'll probably open some of those possibilities on that little bit heavier dirt that, maybe we didn't see a lot of beans planted on in past years. But I would encourage, growers to test it out. We're seeing, more resilient dry bean varieties as well. We heard some grower comments last week too, that those heavy rains that came through, almost to that Port Austin region last fall, where some of these growers seen, 6+ inches of rainfall in August, that, 20 years ago, that would have been a disastrous effect on the majority of the bean crop in that region. Where last year we still seen damage, but those beans were able to recover quite well from some of that. And I think that's a good example of, where the genetics have come and where they're headed to, is that increased plant resilience.
And very possibly field tile as well, because the technology on that and the installation of field tile, it happens every year, especially later in the summer on wheat fields. You see a lot of field tile going in, and the area between the field tile keeps getting less and less and less. They're running strands through. You've had some grant money to work with. Tell us a little bit about what your research has involved, given that grant dollars here lately.
Yeah, so Michigan State has had a great partnership with the Michigan Bean Commission and the Michigan Department of Agriculture. They've been funded through specialty crop block programs, as well as some different fertilizer targeted research. And in the area of dry beans, that's really focused on 3 areas that I kind of work in. The first would be genetics, and that's testing our county variety trials. The second would be fertilizer, and nutrient management, which has been an area of really increased focus over the past 3 years. Looking at our crop needs and demands to fertilize that crop for optimal production. And then the third would be disease management, really focusing on white mold, anthracnose, and root rots. We see here, we're looking at a quick image of what I would say is my home base. So this is the Saginaw Valley Research and Extension Center in Richville. And this has been kind of ground zero for a lot of that work, especially the fertility work that's been in partnership with Dr. Kurt Steinke. Really reevaluating what our dry beans need for optimal fertilizer recommendations. This is something that hasn't been looked at in Michigan since, the early 1980s. So we were really happy we were able to get this funding and really put that back on the map as a target priority for the Michigan Bean Commission.
Now, as far as the research goes, and when you talk about all those different points, what are you finding? Do you have some results that you can share with us right now?
Yeah, so some of the results that we have found have been, somewhat surprising. We took on this project initially, looking at where our dry bean yields have gone. And most growers would, say that over the past 20 years, their dry bean yields have increased. But when we ask that same question about what has your fertilizer use been on dry beans, most growers haven't made too many adjustments, especially in their nitrogen program, which we found to be surprising. So when we looked at this, we said, hey, our hypothesis may be, maybe we need to increase our N usage and we can, see some increased productivity out of those plants, and really push yield. However, what we found is that standard management, which we would say is, 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen, has really proven to be the optimal rate for those beans at this time. And it is an important consideration to look at your rotation as well, and what your soil nitrate levels are coming into dry beans. We're finding a lot of times we're getting some pretty good credits, whether you're following something like early dig sugar beets or have some clover cover crop in your wheat if you're coming off small grains. But that's been a really exciting note that we've uncovered and really helps us with the sustainability of the dry bean crop. It really shows that we're doing more with less, and I really believe it's linked to the genetics of those crops and a lot of the small plot research that has taken place over the past 50 years here in Michigan focused on dry beans.
And there's a picture right there of some of the small plot equipment that you're using. That particular one, a planter?
Yeah, so this it always catches a lot of attention when we come to growers' fields with it. So this is what we use to plant the dry bean performance trials, which all go on farm in Michigan. Currently, there are 6 county locations, and the planter we use is a white 4-row planter, and that allows us to drop a different variety of seed every 25 feet, and that planter never needs to stop, and it cleans out all the way in between those plots and allows us to put those replicated plot trials in a grower's field, in a very timely fashion.
This particular is this at the dry bean farm, at the research farm? This picture?
So this picture was actually taking place up near Gagetown last year. Doing some work up there in some partnership with some different companies. But it does spend a lot of time on a trailer come June as we make our way around the state.
Well, you bring up an interesting point that I was kind of curious about. You work with individual farmers as well as companies. If someone would like to partner with you, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I always encourage growers to reach out to me and talk. We're always looking for grower collaborators. We really see it as a partnership between us and the growers to work towards the objectives or problems that they're seeing in their field, and we're always happy to help. I'm going to lob my cell phone number out here in a second, so I'll give you a minute to get a pen and paper. But if you don't have one, you can find me on the MichiganBean.com. If you go to About Us, there's a list of commissioners, and I'm listed at the bottom with my phone number and email. But if you've got a pen, my cell number is 810-304-3698, and we're always happy to chat. And we are working in some large plot research as well over the past couple of years. We actually put our first strip trial of 2021 in on Monday, looking at some cover crops ahead of dry beans to help hold that soil down and have some other potential benefits that we do see from cover crops.
What are you finding right now with cover crops? But what's the research indicating?
Yeah, so this has been really a move that we're just starting this year. We've all heard the benefits of cover crops, and being able to slow down erosion and help us with some nitrate management, and these other beneficial things such as weed control. So in partnership with Dr. Christy Sprague at MSU, we've looked at some different things of, overwintering cereal cover crops as well as spring seeding to help us with some weed suppression and help hold that soil down, especially in a dry year like we've seen so far. We've all seen that tillage take place in, early June in the thumb of Michigan. Sometimes we can really get some soil blowing. So if there's anything we can do to help hold that soil that we have, we're going to look into our sources for being able to do that.
Do we have much no-till dry beans?
So no-till dry beans isn't something that's really taken off here in Michigan. We do have some growers that are doing it, and some do it successfully, and some have had some learning curves with it. So that's where we've seen that's another good research objective for us here at the Michigan Bean Commission and MSU to see what we can't learn in those systems and what tips we may have for our growers who are interested in doing something like that.
I know the chemistry of agriculture has changed dramatically over a number of years. And just within the past few years, we've had to battle weeds that, quite frankly, have shown resistance to some of the accepted chemicals that we've used in the past. Dry beans, like some other crops, are a little sensitive to certain chemistry. What have you seen so far? What has the research indicated that seems to be an issue? Like you put it on the year before, you might not be able to plant a dry bean in that field this year. What are your findings?
Yeah, so dry beans are one that, like you say, we really do need to be cautious of what our chemical program does look like in our previous crops as well as in crop dry beans. One of the things that we have seen a little bit is, there's always potential for a little bit of, stinger carryover from sugar beets. It's something that we often see, maybe it's close to where we're loading trucks or if we're getting some overlap. And stinger is something that's come on for management of, mare's tail or horseweed and sugar beets. And another one that's always good to keep on the radar is sharpen. That we're also looking at, for some control of, maybe it's mare's tail or some of our other resistant species ahead of planting. And it's important that we remember we cannot use that in a burn down ahead of dry beans, dry beans are very sensitive to sharpen.
I know one thing that's always been an issue, and you bring it up with sugar beets, compaction. And dry beans. Dry beans, you mentioned, they don't like wet feet, and usually compaction causes wet feet. Suggestions as far as growers where maybe the headlands of a dry bean field might be a different crop?
Well, no, those are good points, Terry. And that kind of brings us back to some of our cover crop conversation. Especially with sugar beets and pickles and some of these other crops where, minimum till and some of those things aren't necessarily an option. We've looked at some different species such as cereal rye, in combination with some, deep ripping and tillage to help alleviate some of that compaction and get us some better drainage, especially on those headlands and areas where, we are prone to get wet feet and see those root rot symptoms really show in our dry bean crops. I have not experimented with looking at other crops on headlands. The one concern that I do have is when we talk about dry beans, they are a food crop too. So if we talk about something like maybe soybeans, it's always important that we keep distance between those and we don't have any crossover because when we deliver our dry beans to the elevator, we really need to be cautious of what other crops are in that load.
And again, your research, there's a lot of information there. Give us an address. How can we access some of that research?
Yeah, so all of our research is available on michiganbean.com/research. If you go to that tab, there's a tab that says growers and dealers, and research should be the first one under that tab. So on there, you'll find all of our research reports from not only this year, but past years. And you can kind of see the evolution of where our projects have gone. And this current project that's really focused on not only fertility, but genetics, as well as disease management.
And here we see a picture. This was taken, what, just a couple of days ago?
Yeah, this picture on the left looking at the Joker cedar was just taken on Monday afternoon. And it's pretty odd to see dust flying in March, but I was pretty happy to be out there.
And again, what are we sowing?
So in this trial, we looked at 2 different rates, 1 bushel and 2 bushel of oats, rye, and wheat. In an attempt to hold that soil down ahead of dry bean planting to see what kind of growth we can get between now and say a mid-May burn down or termination, and see what beneficial response we may see for weed control and some of these other things. But also we're a little worried about what our emergence will look like and how our tillage will be into that system. So we've seen this as a great chance to use that research farm in Richville to test one of these ideas that might be a little more outside the box for bean producers, and see what we can learn.
And again, your telephone number, if we can post that again, it is what, Scott?
810-304-3698. And we're always happy to chat about potential questions you have or research projects you have in mind.
Scott Bales, it's always fun to talk to you. You've always got some new information all the time, and we really enjoy you sharing it with a lot of our producers and non-producers. These programs are emphasis toward our growers, but I know we have a lot of people that really aren't involved in production agriculture, and they're fascinated by the new technology because they remember maybe grandpa, dad, or great-grandpa was a farmer. The farm today is a whole lot different than what it was 25, 30, 40 years ago. Wouldn't you agree?
Things have certainly evolved, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. So it's a fun industry to be a part of, and we're always happy to talk to those growers, as I said. But I'm happy to chat with anybody who ever wants to talk beans. It's always a good time.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you on the air today, Scott. Scott Bales, you take care. I'm Terry Henney, and yes, we've been talking beans today with Scott Bales. Our broadcast today brought to you by the folks at BASF.
It's never just been a field. It's a lab where beakers and vials are corn stalks and bean pods. It's 1,000 dinners on 1,000 plates throughout the world. It's the engine of the American economy. It's our survival. It's never been just a field. It's our future. All of ours. Your field is the future. BASF.